All right, so you're ready to conquer the CCSP exam. Well, get ready to dive into some serious investigative and forensic concepts that are going to be crucial not just for the exam, but also for your real-world cybersecurity career.
A lot of people think these topics are just about theory, but honestly, understanding them can make or break a case, whether it's in the exam room or out there on the front lines.
Yeah, I mean, imagine you're dealing with a major security incident. You need to know what to look for, how to collect evidence, and how to make sure it all holds up under scrutiny.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to be unpacking today, those essential skills and knowledge that every cybersecurity professional needs to have.
So let's start with the basics. Let's say you're working in a company and suddenly, boom, something goes wrong. What are the different kinds of investigations you might find yourself dealing with?
Well, there are four main types of investigations that you really need to understand: operational, criminal, civil, and regulatory.
Okay, let's break those down. What makes each one unique, especially for someone in cybersecurity?
All right, so first up, we've got operational investigations. These are kind of like your internal investigations. Think of it like troubleshooting a security incident within your own organization. Systems are acting up, maybe some data is missing, things like that.
So it's about figuring out what went wrong and fixing the problem.
Exactly. The good news is that the rules of evidence aren't as strict here because you're not usually heading to court. It's more about getting to the root cause and finding a solution.
Okay, that makes sense. But I imagine things get a bit more serious when we're talking about criminal investigations, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Criminal investigations are where things get real. We're talking about potential violations of the law, and these are led by, well, law enforcement. The consequences can be huge, fines, jail time, all that.
Wow. Okay. So this is where understanding the legal side of cybersecurity becomes super important.
You got it. You might be working with law enforcement, providing evidence, maybe even testifying in court. It's crucial to know your stuff and follow the proper procedures.
All right. So we've got operational and criminal investigations. What about civil investigations? Where do those fit in?
Civil investigations usually involve disputes between two parties. Think lawsuits, contract breaches, that kind of thing. And guess what? Cybersecurity incidents often play a central role.
So like if someone steals intellectual property or causes a data breach that leads to financial losses.
Exactly. You might be called upon to uncover evidence, analyze what happened, or even testify as an expert witness. The stakes are high, but not quite as high as in a criminal case.
Okay, so we've got operational, criminal, and civil. Last but not least, we have regulatory investigations, right?
You got it. These are the ones led by government agencies or industry regulators. They're all about making sure everyone is playing by the rules and following those specific regulations.
So like making sure companies are complying with data privacy laws or industry standards.
Exactly. And here's the interesting part. They can be either civil or criminal, depending on what they uncover.
So you really need to be on your toes with these regulatory investigations.
Absolutely. The evidence you gather could have serious legal ramifications. You have to be extra careful and meticulous in your approach.
All right, so those are the four types of investigations. Now, I know that interviews are a key part of almost any investigation. How should a cybersecurity pro approach interviews, especially keeping in mind the legal side of things?
Well, first and foremost, you need to remember that interviews are all about gathering information. It's a fact-finding mission, not an interrogation.
Okay, so you're there to ask questions, get insights, and piece together what happened, but not to accuse anyone or put pressure on them.
Right, and this is super important. Cybersecurity professionals are not law enforcement. We don't conduct interrogations. That's a whole different ballgame with a whole different set of rules.
Got it. Interviews are for gathering information, and we leave the interrogations to the professionals. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about evidence. What are the different types of evidence that a cybersecurity pro might encounter during these investigations?
Well, you've got your real evidence, which is basically anything you can physically touch, like the actual devices involved, servers, computers, phones, stuff like that.
Okay, so real evidence is the physical stuff. What else is there?
Then you've got documentary evidence, which is basically anything in digital format. Think logs, emails, chat records, all that good stuff.
Ah, so the digital trails we leave behind.
Exactly. And finally, you've got testimonial evidence, which comes from people. This could be eyewitness accounts from users or expert opinions from, well, experts like us.
So if we're dealing with, let's say, a data breach, would server logs fall under documentary evidence?
Yes, absolutely. Server logs, system logs, application logs, those are all examples of documentary evidence.
Okay, so that makes sense. But are there any special rules or things to watch out for when dealing with documentary evidence, especially in the digital world?
You bet there are. Authentication is key. You need to be able to prove that the evidence is what you say it is and that it hasn't been tampered with.
So, like, how do you prove that a log file is actually from the server it's supposed to be from and hasn't been altered?
There are a lot of techniques and tools for that, and it can get pretty technical, but the basic idea is to establish a chain of custody, which we'll talk about more later.
Okay, so authentication is one thing. What else?
Then there's the best evidence rule. This basically says that the original document is always preferred over a copy.
So, like, a screenshot of a log entry might not be good enough.
It might not be. You ideally want the original log file itself. And then there's the parole evidence rule, which is all about written agreements taking precedence over verbal statements.
So if there's a contract involved, you got to go with what's written down, not what someone said they agreed to.
That's right. These rules can get a bit tricky, but they're super important to understand, especially if you're dealing with any kind of legal proceedings.
Okay, so we've got real evidence, documentary evidence, and testimonial evidence. And we've touched on some of the legal considerations, especially with digital evidence. What about testimonial evidence? What are some key things to keep in mind there?
Well, with testimonial evidence, you always have to be mindful of the hearsay rule. Basically, you can't just repeat something someone else told you unless they're there to testify themselves.
It's like that game of telephone where the message can get all messed up as it's passed along.
Exactly. You have to be careful about the source of the information and make sure it's reliable and can stand up to scrutiny.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but now I want to dive into something that always fascinates me. Digital forensics.
Ah, yes. Digital forensics. It's where things get really high-tech and exciting.
Yeah, for real. It's like being a detective in the digital world. What exactly is digital forensics all about?
It's all about digging into the digital world to uncover the truth. It's about collecting, preserving, analyzing, and interpreting digital evidence. Think of it like detective work, but for computers and networks.
So we're talking about pulling data from a hacked computer or piecing together a timeline of events based on digital footprints.
You got it. It's like putting together a puzzle, except the pieces are scattered across hard drives, network traffic, cloud services, you name it.
That sounds intense. What are some of the key things that a cybersecurity pro needs to know about digital forensics?
Well, just like in a crime scene investigation, the most important rule is to never alter the evidence. One wrong move, and you could compromise the entire case.
Okay, I'm getting don't touch the crime scene vibes here. But how do you avoid altering digital evidence when you're literally working with it?
That's where the concept of volatility comes into play. Different types of digital evidence have different lifespans.
So like some data disappears the moment you turn off a computer, while other data sticks around for years.
Exactly. And understanding the order of volatility is crucial. You need to collect the most volatile stuff first before it vanishes into thin air.
So like grabbing the contents of RAM before you turn off the computer.
Precisely. You got to work your way down the order of volatility, starting with the most delicate and fleeting data.
Makes sense. Now what about timestamps? It seems like they would be super important in figuring out what happened when.
You're right. Timestamps are crucial for establishing a timeline of events. But here's the thing. Different systems might have different time settings, and timestamps can be manipulated.
So you can't just take a timestamp at face value. You have to consider the context and verify its accuracy.
You got it. It's all about understanding the nuances and potential pitfalls.
Wow, I never thought about that. So it's not just about looking at the timestamp. It's about understanding the whole picture.
Exactly. And sometimes you might even need to consider evidence that isn't strictly digital.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Think security camera footage or witness statements. Sometimes, even in the digital world, those physical pieces of evidence can be crucial.
So it's all about connecting the dots, both digital and physical.
Exactly. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle, and sometimes those non-digital pieces can be the key to solving the mystery.
All right, so we've covered a ton of ground here. Different types of investigations, types of evidence, legal considerations, and even a bit of digital forensics. What would you say is the most important takeaway for someone who's studying for the CCSP exam?
If I had to pick one thing, it would be the chain of custody.
Okay, chain of custody. Got it. We're going to unpack that concept in more detail in just a bit.
It's all about ensuring that evidence hasn't been tampered with, and it's absolutely essential for maintaining the integrity of an investigation. But first, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsor. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back, and ready to dig into this chain of custody thing. It sounds super important, but if I'm being honest, it also kind of sounds like, well, a whole lot of paperwork.
Well, yeah, there's definitely some paperwork involved. But think of it this way. The chain of custody is like a bodyguard for your evidence, you know? It's all about proving that the evidence you've worked so hard to collect hasn't been tampered with or messed up in any way. And that's like super important, especially if you end up in court.
Okay, so how does this chain of custody thing actually work in the real world?
Imagine it's like a relay race. But instead of passing a baton, you're passing along a piece of really important evidence. And every single person who handles that evidence, from the moment it's collected to the moment it's presented in court, has to be documented. Every single one.
Okay, so like if I find a suspicious USB drive during an investigation, I can't just like toss it in my backpack and call it a day.
Nope, not even close. You got to treat that USB drive like it's like a
Yeah.
priceless artifact. Carefully package it, label it with all the important info, who collected it, when, where, why, the whole 9 yards. And then every time that drive changes hands, even if it's just moving it to a more secure storage spot, you got to record that too.
Okay, so we're talking about creating a super detailed paper trail for every single piece of evidence.
Huh.
What kind of information needs to be in those records?
Everything that matters. You need the who, what, when, where, and why for every interaction with the evidence. Who touched it? What did they do with it? The date and time, the location, and the reason they were handling it. No detail is too small when it comes to the chain of custody.
Wow, I'm starting to see why you said this was like a relay race.
Yeah.
It's all about keeping that chain unbroken, making sure there are no gaps in the documentation. What happens if, like, someone forgets to log a piece of evidence or, I don't know, a bag gets mishandled or something?
Uh-oh. That's when things can get really messy. Any break in that chain of custody can raise some serious red flags about whether the evidence is legit. The other side's lawyers, they'll jump all over that. They could argue that the evidence was tampered with or that you can't be sure where it even came from. And in a worst-case scenario, the judge might decide the evidence can't even be used in court.
So all that hard work, all that careful investigation could be thrown out because of a missing signature or a broken seal.
That's the harsh reality. And it's a big reminder that cybersecurity isn't just about technical skills, It's also about understanding the legal stuff, the procedures, all of that.
Okay, that's a serious point.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to see how all of this connects to different types of investigations, how important it is to handle evidence correctly, and now this whole chain of custody thing. It's all tied together.
You got it. And it's all super important for anyone who wants to get that CCSP certification. But honestly, it's about way more than just passing an exam. It's about being a responsible and effective cybersecurity pro, someone who knows how to do things the right way.
Absolutely. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about making sure that justice is served and that the bad guys don't get away with it. So to all you future CCSPs out there, listen up. These investigative and forensic concepts, they're not just theoretical. They have real consequences in the real world. They can make or break a case, just like we've been talking about.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Whether you're responding to a security incident, doing some forensic analysis, or even just handing over evidence to law enforcement, you gotta know how to handle and document everything correctly. It's essential.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground today. From the different types of investigations to the ins and outs of digital forensics and the whole chain of custody thing, it's been quite a journey. But before we wrap things up, I want to hear from you, our awesome listeners. So what really clicked for you today? What are you going to really focus on as you keep studying for the CCSP? Let us know in the comments. We always love hearing from you.
And, even beyond the exam, these skills are going to stick with you throughout your cybersecurity journey. Being able to investigate thoroughly, analyze evidence properly, and keep that chain of custody solid, that's what makes you a real pro.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's all about having that solid foundation,
Yeah.
The knowledge and the skills, both are important. So keep
Yeah.
hitting those books, keep practicing, and try to imagine yourself in those real-world situations. It'll all come together.
It will. And if there's one last piece of advice we can give you, it's this. Never underestimate the power of the details. Whether it's documenting a timestamp, carefully bagging and tagging evidence, or making sure that chain of custody is bulletproof, it's the little things that make all the difference.
So true. All right, folks, that's a wrap for our deep dive into cybersecurity investigations and forensics. Hope you found it helpful. And if you're prepping for that CCSD exam, remember, we're here with you every step of the way.
We are. Keep learning, keep challenging yourselves, and keep those security skills sharp.
And hey, if you enjoyed today's deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more awesome content. Until next time, happy studying and stay secure out there.